Hi, Shel Phillips here, shining a light in the dark corners of cybersecurity, and specifically today, CMMC. I'm joined by two of my good buddies and trusted advisors in the world of CMMC, Brian Hubbard, who's the president of Evolve Cyber Solutions, his consulting practice, and MSP CyberX, a nonprofit peer group that focuses on cybersecurity. And secondly, my good friend Chris Haig, who is the CEO of Meerkat Cyber LLC, which is, yeah, there you go, which is a C3 PIO and is in the consulting practice as well. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Shel, for the opportunity.
Yeah,
I will give you one correction. I'm sorry I didn't talk about this earlier. We are a candidate, C3PAO. Have been on our path so long that we should have been C3PAOs, and we have two assessors and one almost a third assessor in our ranks. Funny little rule that got thrown at us was, hey, you to be a C3PAO, you need to have a credit record, and we didn't have one because we've never taken out debt. And so we have to, instead of that, hire an accountant to go through our books and prove that we're a real legitimate company that really does exist here in the United States. So we got held up by this silly, and it's not even a rule, but I think after we saw the IG report come out, we understand why they're worried about C3PAOs. So
good distinction.
Almost there.
Yeah,
we're almost at the finish line.
Pointed that out at the bottom line. All three of us are consultants in the CMMC business, and are seeking to really figure this thing out. So today the topic is, of course, how MSPs play and are affected by CMMC, NIST 80171, the 2.1 rule, and so on. And we'll dive into each of those aspects. Before we do that, I want to give the disclaimer: we are not speaking on behalf of the Department of Defense or DIBCAC, the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center. We are not officially speaking on their behalf. We're three consultants who have to figure this out as we go forward to assessments. And that's the conversation we're having today. So I just want to make that clear that this is not an official statement of policy or practice. It's our sort of considered conversation about that. Okay, with that disclaimer out of the way, again, the topic today is how are MSPs impacted by this new rule. So let's start with a little background. Chris, maybe you can fill us in on how NIST 80171, CMMC 2.0, and the new 2.1 rule, how are they related, and sort of what is that piece? Let's get some context here, and then we'll dive in with Brian of how MSPs are looped into that. So let's start with you, Chris.
Let's talk about NIST 171. This was a framework developed in cooperation with the DoD. They came to NIST and said, look, we have a lot of contractors that we need to give them sensitive information, controlled unclassified information, and we want to have a set of standards that they follow. NIST 171 was the result of the collaboration with NIST to come up with a kind of a short stack of requirements. And it's also, of course, also being updated because anything in cybersecurity doesn't stay stagnant. And we have a revision 3 that's out, but we're following revision 2. CMMC is built on that. CMMC 2.1 now has become final based on revision 2 of 171. They would have gone with revision 3, but rulemaking takes so long and it's so important to get it out there. They said, let's go with 2. We'll update later. And then let's see what the third part was.
About the rule. What is the 2.1 rule, and sort of how does it impact us in consulting and assessing?
So let me summarize 470 pages and say it is our Bible. It is what we turn to understand the complexity of what the DoD has asked for. What they previously started with, Plan A, I will say, was they said, here's NIST 171 and here's this DFAR 7012 clause. It says to go follow NIST 171. They had 5 inspector generals in a row go in and see if this was being done, and all 5 reported back it's not being done. So there was a need to have clarity and need to have third parties also to come in and help discuss this. So this is now applicable to the entire Defense Industrial Base. If you are handling CUI specifically, you're going to have to follow all of the 110 requirements or controls. And if you are supporting them, you're going to get roped into that too, because if you support some element of those 110 controls, guess what? We want to make sure you're doing it the right way too.
Okay, elephant in the room question. Do MSPs have to be certified under 2.0? No, but,
No.
right?
No, but big asterisk.
Yes.
No,
A
but,
big but.
okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of the, I mean, everybody's coming up with, oh no, they don't have to be, okay, whew, now I can do my own thing. But that's not the point. That is not the point. Brian, how did MSPs get looped into this whole thought process? Are they actually named in the controls themselves or the assessment objectives, or how does this work? Give us some background.
So it's in the rule. There's a term that has been invented called external service provider, which encompasses both cloud service providers and external service and managed service providers, both MSPs and MSSPs, right? But it basically says, if you are providing services to your client that are in service of the protection of controlled and classified information, or the things that MSPs do, like account provisioning and maintaining the systems, there are controls that you are responsible for, and you're going to have to show in your services descriptions, basically to the OSC, which is the organization seeking certification, i.e. your clients as an MSP. You're going to have to show what those services are and how they impact the OSC's security certification abilities. And you have to provide something called a customer responsibility matrix. And the customer responsibility matrix should detail out for each of the controls. Are you responsible for it? Is the client responsible for it? And if the MSP is responsible for it, how do you provide that service? And if the customer is responsible for it, what are their responsibilities? And it might be a shared responsibility, right? There might be some things the MSP does, some things the client has to do, like account provisioning, right? The MSP can't just invent new users on behalf of the client, right? They shouldn't. Hopefully they're not. But they have to get authorization for those individuals to have new accounts set up, for example. So there's shared responsibility there. As an
Okay,
example.
so we'll dig into that CRM, SRM thing in a minute, but that's a good reference. So are MSPs referenced within the 110 controls of the 320 assessment objectives? Are they named? No, they're not named.
They're not.
But 2.1 rule, which is a much larger document surrounding the 2.0 controls, actually, that's how they're brought in. Is that correct?
Correct. There's something called the scoping guide. And in the scoping for CMMC and what's in scope, what's out of scope, there are different categories of component of your system, because your system is a complex system of systems.
Right.
But there's controlled and classified information assets, right? Obviously, those are the ones that are actually storing, processing, transmitting CUI. There is security protection assets. Those are the things that are used to protect the systems that are storing, processing, and transmitting CUI. And there are specialized assets, which are, or I should have started with contractor risk managed assets. These are assets that are on the network that also contains CUI, but are not intended to ever have CUI. Think accounting department. Think if you have like a flat network and your accounting team is on the network, well, they probably never really need to access, and their systems don't need to access CUI. So they could be contractor risk managed assets, and essentially through procedural mechanisms, they are never have CUI. So there's those kind of assets. Then there's specialized assets, which are like Internet of Things, government supplied systems, and things like that, operational technology, that are called specialized assets. So in order to understand the MSP's impact, right, you really have to understand what are the services they're providing, right? So what are they storing the customer's information? Are they just providing, those administrative services and in protecting that protect the CUI systems? And whatever the applicable for, if so, that would become, they'd become a security protection asset. And then they would be assessed against the applicable controls. So whichever controls apply to that particular service that they're providing, they would be assessed against those controls.
Okay. Okay, that's a lot of words and good stuff.
I know, right? A lot of terminology there.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to watch back this whole session a bunch of times to really ferret out all the details, and we'll probably put up a white paper that sort of bullet points some of the summarizes what we're saying, but that's a great start, and I appreciate that. Chris, could you define for us security protection data, what it looks like, and how is it managed typically within the environment?
I am so happy to be able to turn to the rule and say they did it for us. And that is a good thing, because this has been somewhat of a moving target, as has CMMC in general. But on the rule, toward almost the very end, we're talking in the last 20 pages of this 400 plus rule, 400 plus page rule, 470 to be exact, right around 450 or so, you get definitions. Security protection data is specifically addressed, and it says, quote, data stored or processed by security protection assets. So we got to pull in another definition. And it's used to protect an OSC's assessed environment. This data, SPD, is security relevant information and includes but is not limited to, and this is what we really need to pay attention to. What does all that mean? Here it is. Configuration data required to operate an SPA, security protection asset, log files generated by or ingested by that SPA, data related to the configuration or vulnerability status of in-scope assets, and passwords that grant access to the in-scope environment. So all this data that revolves around how are we protecting our clients? And they have defined that as security protection data, totally new term. And therefore, we need to think about what to do with that, how to protect that.
Okay, there's the rub right there. That's what brings it all together for MSPs. That data has historically been captured by the MSP, managed by the MSP. Could be network diagrams, could be configuration definitions, it could be backups of firewalls and those sorts of things as well. All those things are considered and probably in scope for an assessment. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So there's the connection, and we want to talk a little bit. One of the big questions is this tool FedRAMP certified? Is it CMMC Level 2 certified? Let's talk a little bit about the tools. What can we use? Let's start with the OSA, the subcontractor seeking certification. What protection tools can they use? And let's be very clear about that's antivirus, anti-malware, that's MFA. It might be managed detection and remediation tool, an MDR. It might be any of those things, possibly even a GRC, a governance risk management platform. Let's talk about those. What are your opinions about those? How much are they looped into the scope in general and maybe in specific? And are those tools available to the OSA? And if they are they also available to the MSP? And where's the line? How would you scope some of those things? So, Brian, let's go back to you and let's talk about some of those things. It's a big topic. I get it.
I was going to say there's a lot to unpack in that, but I mean, I think the main thing is so the distinction, right, is between controlled unclassified CUI assets and security protection assets. So if something is storing, processing, if a cloud-based service, a tool is storing, processing, or transmitting CUI, then it has to be FedRAMP moderate. No ifs, ands, or buts. Right? It has to be FedRAMP moderate or bullet.
Yeah, give an example of that. Might be
Okay.
Azure, for example, GCC or
Yeah,
something.
let's talk about, Azure or, Box,
Yep,
where you
yep,
might be
yep.
using Box to store
Sure.
information, store CUI and things like that. Well, then, you would need to ensure that Box in that case is FedRAMP moderate. They happen to be, by the way, the example I picked. Or you use, say, a Salesforce as your CRM. They have a non-FedRAMP side, they have a FedRAMP side. So you would need to make sure if you're going to store CUI in that cloud, that they have FedRAMP moderate authorization, which means that they've gone through a very rigorous assessment process, and that tool itself is you can inherit a lot of things from it. You don't have to dig in to prove that the tool protects the CUI in certain ways. It's already been proven. It's already been authorized. So security protection assets, the things that store, process, or transmit security protection data, those do not, if they're cloud-based, those do not necessarily have to be FedRAMP moderate. They don't, well, they aren't required to be. Let's just say it that way. However, those tools are part of your security solution. So those tools are going to be part of your assessment, right? So there's going to be information that's going to have to be understood and provided to the assessors, and the assessors are going to have to look at it on how those tools do those jobs in order to make you compliant with particular controls. So, that's another one of those things that, Shell, as you said in the intro, everybody said, oh, great, MSPs don't have to be assessed. Well, yeah, but the tools don't have to be FedRAMP. Oh, great. Well, that doesn't mean we don't have to look at them, right? It doesn't mean that we can just use any old thing out there. We have to really understand about them. So there is still a substantial benefit, even in secure protection assets, from having tools that are actually FedRAMP authorized, because you get all that evidence coming with it. Otherwise, we do have to understand: is it doing the job that you expect it to do, and is it meeting the intent of the requirement?
And just to connect some dots to our earlier conversation, the subset that we talked about in NIST 171 is the subset of FedRAMP. It's all goes back to NIST 53. So when you get FedRAMP authorized, you have to be compliant with NIST 53. And that's why we believe, okay, if you had to do all those requirements, and like Brian said, many, many more than NIST 171, you're probably in a good place. We can trust that authorization. If you haven't, and there's something called equivalency, then you need to go have third parties attest that you've gone through something equivalent. And what's really interesting about the equivalency is I personally believe it's going away because of two sources. One was yesterday's publication of the FAR rule, and FAR applies to all federal agencies. They said, how are the rest of the agencies going to handle CUI? The DoD came out with this CMMC program while the rest of the agencies in the FAR clause was still in draft mode. DoD is like, no, we need to do it. So they came out with what we now know as CMMC. But the rest of the agencies are catching up now. And they said, no equivalency. You just go back to get FedRAMP authorized. What's the DoD doing with equivalency? I asked that of David McCune at the DoD, and he said, expect that to be ditched. We're probably going to modify 7012 to just remove equivalent. So that's something that is critical to those of you looking at what tools you're using right now to think about, is it FedRAMP authorized or not?
Yeah, it's actually a higher bar to get FedRAMP equivalency than it is to get FedRAMP authorized.
It is. So you'd think they can do it, except for the fact that FedRAMP authorized means an agency-sponsored deal.
That's right. That's all it means. Yeah.
Yep.
Great. So let me ask this question, just to be clear and to set it straight. In your opinion, is security protection data, SPD, equivalent to CUI?
No.
Okay. So we can kind of take that off the board. However, it is looped in, as you've just described, into the process. I've got a question about GRCs, okay, specifically the platform. That's the place that you capture your system security plan, the details, your security details. Frankly, it holds kind of the keys to the kingdom. How are you going to wrap and scope that into the process And would you be looking for FedRAMP certification of those kinds of tools?
Chris, you want to take that first, Brian?
Sure. I'll tackle it first. So first, there's always a lot of confusion out there because the DoD says, has told this CMMC third-party assessment organizations that they have to treat all of this data that they get from their clients, the contractors, as CUI. It's not CUI. They just have to treat it as such. As a business that's going through this, my data that I'm creating, my system security plan, my all this stuff is not CUI. It certainly is proprietary and certainly should be protected as much as possible. And you shouldn't be just giving it out willy-nilly to anybody or throwing it up on any old cloud. So GRC platforms are great. There's a lot of really good ones out there to support the CMMC efforts of companies. I always highly encourage my clients to try to use them because it helps you manage your program. But you do have to take care, right? You want to make sure that the security architecture of the tool that you're using is actually good and solid, just like everything else in your security program. You need to make sure that the tools you're using have a solid footing, So, that's what you want to look at. But as far as the data goes and the management of that data, it's your data. And it's not government data. It's not developed under a government contract, so therefore it cannot ever be CUI, right? It's not CUI. So it can be stored in those cloud-based systems, and those cloud-based systems don't have to be FedRAMP. FedRAMP just gives you more assurance, gives you more trust in that tool.
I want to read one part of the rule that is on point here, but has caused, I'd say, some consternation.
Yeah.
This is at page 209, security protection data requires protection commensurate with the CUI it protects and is based on how and where the security protection data is stored, to Brian's point. The FedRAMP requirements for handling security protection data is therefore the same as that for handling CUI. So that is the guidance they give. However, it's in a comment section of the rule. Comment sections are not always the same gravity as the rule itself as it was written. So that shows you kind of where the DoD's mindset is. And this is what's caused a lot of people to say, look, maybe my GRC tool needs to have a whole lot of protections in place. Some of them are saying I'd like to see them CMMC certified at a minimum. But it's a huge topic right now. And what we're watching the sausage get made with CMMC. There's some opinions out there. There are things that made it into the rules that didn't necessarily, they weren't discussed enough, and it's not clear exactly what they mean. So we are watching this process evolve. And if you don't like roller coasters, you're in the wrong space. This is going to be a fun ride.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great analogy. Great analogy. Well, let's turn a corner and let's talk about services. Let's start with help desk type services, tech support. Let's talk about remote access or how we would service an account. I believe there's probably three ways that qualify. One, you have a tech walk into the OSC's office. They follow all the rules. They card in. They're governed by the OSC's sort of protection rules about authentication, identity, and all those pieces. They sit down to a device that's approved and authorized and correctly configured to be able to manage that environment. It's SPD device, and they can sit down to it and they can do the work, right? That's a qualified way to do it.
Yeah, they would be a security protection asset, right? Because humans can be assets, by the way.
Right.
In this, yeah.
That does not scale, right?
Right.
It does not scale. You'd have to run out people to every client and do that. The second way is if the tech had a device, a laptop, let's say, that is governed by the OSC's environment, infrastructure, authentication, and all those pieces, and he has that laptop and he follows the remote access rules that have been laid out, and he does his thing remotely. That's also approved. Yep. It
Mhm.
would be in scope, but
Yeah.
it would certainly comply.
It would be part of the client's certification process. Yes.
Provided it's a VPN connection. I think that went into the
Yeah.
rule.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So now he has a stack of client laptops on his desk,
Yeah.
and he pulls out the one that he has to use in order
Yeah.
to support the guy that just called in. That does not scale either.
No.
Okay.
And oh, by the way, he wouldn't be using any of the tools on the back end for, like, PSA and everything else that they're trying
That's
to
correct.
track
You wouldn't
things. Right.
wouldn't have access to those tools
Right.
unless the OSA had purchased and installed their own,
Their
you
own.
know,
Yeah.
hosted PSA or whatever it might be.
Right.
Right. Okay. Third way, the MSP and the OSA follow the same SSP policies and procedures, configuration requirements, and so their machines essentially are governed by the very same rules and regulations. The tech authenticates up through the cloud, through, let's say, M365. All the authentication happens, and then he virtually connects to a jump box in the OSA's environment that also is governed by the OSA's environment, and he can then remote to the various components that he needs to get to. Does that work?
Mhm. Yes.
Okay. That does scale, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, that works. So that's another way to do it. Yes.
Okay. Give me a fourth alternative.
Well, it's sort of a hybrid, right? So where you're using your own, so the MSP has their own environment, their own systems, and that sort of thing, and then they provide services to their clients. All of those tools, processes, and things to have to be verified on the MSP side. So how do you how do you authorize your users, right? Into the MSP, I'm talking about the MSP users. How do
Right?
you authorize those users onto particular clients, right? How do you authorize them into the tools? How do you protect the data on the back end? Let's say you're collecting log data from your clients.
Right?
How is that protected? How is that managed? How do you protect the data, and how do you protect the tools themselves from authorization, from unauthorized alteration? That is part of the control set, right? Those are the things that you would have to, as the applicable controls that you would have to be following. So it's possible that you don't have to have a homogeneous environment with your client. You can have a heterogeneous environment, right? You can have things that are different. It's just that you're going to be looking at all of this stuff, even if in the homogeneous environment where you have the same systems, you're going to have to look at how the MSP is doing it and how the OSC is doing it, and they both should match, but they may not, and they have to both meet the controls.
Right. So let's take a step back. Let's say MSP A is not certified. They're using their traditional tools and that sort of thing. What impact would that have in scoping? And in other words, would their whole infrastructure have to be considered and have to meet the standards, or is there any way to parcel out a DoD sort of practice, if you will, in a standard uncertified MSP?
Congratulations, you're sitting on assessments. And you're going to go through assessments, and you're going to go through the same rigor that your client does.
Right.
Could it be done? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have to be in every single one of them. So
Yeah.
because it's going to vary based on what services you're providing for a particular client.
Right. So then the question is, does it make sense to actually start a new entity, a new MSP, with everything in place, meeting all the criteria, certifiable or certified, and meeting all those requirements, and separate it from your commercial practice? Does that make sense?
It doesn't have to be a separate legal entity, in my opinion, but it does make sense to have an enclave if you have commercial clients and then DoD clients, to have an enclave that is dealing specifically under a new set of rules and those rules and that enclave have gone through the certification process, absolutely, it's going to make the MSP's lives much easier because they're not going to have to sit on all these assessments. They may
Okay.
still, but the level of detail required is going to be far less.
Of course, you know,
Okay.
there's size and scale that's going to take to in order to do that, right? I mean, a 5-person MSP is probably not going to be able to do that.
Right, right. What about the network, the infrastructure that MSP lives in, even though they have an enclave, aren't potentially the endpoint devices, maybe have possible access to the enclave and that sort of thing? I mean, you have to draw some pretty good China walls in that environment. Is that right?
Yeah.
Just like you do with the OSC. There's got to be some Chinese walls there. A and B don't talk to each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We have to come up with a better analogy than Chinese walls these days.
Yeah, sorry. But the concept
Logically
is
separated.
We're not
Yeah,
allowed to use Chinese technology. How can we use a Chinese wall?
exactly.
You know, anyway, so I'm
All
sorry.
right, my mistake. I'll have to dig into my thesaurus and figure out a better thing. So that's kind of the question that these MSPs are going to have to face.
Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we make that separation that will qualify? And that's where consultants are going to have to come in and sort of give good guidance. Let's talk about then the concept of inheritance, the CRM, what you're calling client responsibility matrix. I still like the shared response because you still have a vendor that's part of that. You still have an MSP. You still have the client themselves. But that responsibility matrix, shared responsibility matrix, and inheritance, how do those pieces play together? What does inheritance mean? And if you are certified, does that make the inheritance process even more solid? So let's talk about that.
I'll take
Yeah,
I'll
go
take
ahead,
first
Chris.
stab.
Go ahead.
So the shared responsibility matrix, or CRM, customer responsibility matrix, they're pretty much synonymous. It's one of the first documents that the assessors are going to want to see who's doing what. It's almost as important as a network diagram to understand how do you protect your CUI, not just where does it flow internally, but how do you protect it and are you using somebody else? So it's a critical document. If an MSP doesn't know what a shared responsibility matrix is, you probably are working with the wrong MSP in this space. They need to understand that very well and have it with CMMC specific language that says, okay, for 311A, this is who's doing X, Y, and Z. So that's what you're looking for with an MSP who has that level of education and understanding of your needs as an OSC. And then from there, the assessor knows, okay, here's who's I'm going to need to interview or I'm going to need to confirm by certification if they've been certified. And it's a judgment call on the assessor's side. What is it I need to confirm that this control is being met by the parties who are in control of it, who are servicing that? And that's the point of that shared responsibility matrix, is for us as assessors to make decisions. All right, this is how I confirm that's being done.
Good start. Brian, go into inheritance. What's that concept and how does it really work?
So the idea of inheritance is that, you know, if you're hitting a control that is totally the responsibility of, let's say, a FedRAMP cloud or of some other entity that has been already been certified, then I can basically say I'm doing it because I'm using them to do it. And so I don't, as an assessor, I don't have to go in and relook at that assessment. I don't have to, I can take it on face value that, yep, if that has been passed through FedRAMP or that has have a CMMC level 2, then I am able to inherit that into the OSC. And that's basically done, check, met. Except that because this customer responsibility matrix is going to talk about shared responsibilities. But even on something like it doesn't necessarily, if I'm a MSP that is CMMC level 2 certified, it doesn't mean that I don't have to participate in any assessments. I'm still going to have to show things like, you know, for any particular customer, let's just keep with 3.1.1, which is about authorized users, right, and authorized devices and things like that. I'm going to authorize people to set up accounts. I'm going to say, okay, Charlie can have an account in my system. Boom. Okay, so MSP set it up, and they're going to follow their process. I don't have to look as an assessor if that MSP has been CMMC level 2 certified. I don't have to look at how they do that process, but I do for the OSC assessment have to look at that process was done. So i.e. I'm going to have somebody demonstrate to me that only those people that were authorized have access in the system. So they're going to be pulling up their Active Directory and their security groups and things like that. Well, who's going to do that? It's probably not the OSC. It's going to be the MSP is going to have to do that demonstration. Right. So there's still going to be things where the MSP is going to have to be engaged with their clients as part of the client's assessment, even when they're certified.
Perfect example.
Okay. I think of it now. So tell me the detail that you're looking for. Let's say physical protection. In other words, we talk about, access to doors and that sort of thing. Well, if you have an enclave and it's in a data center, tier 4 data center, okay, how much of description do you look for in documentation that is being done, or that site's certified, or so on and so forth? What level of detail are you looking for? And I'm asking that personally, because I'm having to write some of those things right now for my clients. How much detail do you need for the shared responsibility that comes down from a certified, a FedRAMP certified sort of CSP?
So, okay, from FedRAMP certified CSP. So if it's a FedRAMP authorized, I should want to make sure we don't offend anybody with the wrong terminology.
Yes, sorry.
But authorized, that data center has already been assessed. I don't have to look at it, right? However, if it's your data, if it's your data center and your housing systems in that data center, I have to look at the data center. And oh, by the way, a SOC 2 type 2 is not inheritable. It's good evidence. Hopefully, if it was done correctly, it's good evidence. But I'm still going to have to do all those physical controls.
Right. So I guess my real question is, let's say in the case of an Azure Gov infrastructure, right, and it is authorized, okay,
right.
What do I have to say on my shared responsibility matrix when it comes to physical protection and door locks and that sort of thing? Do I just say it's a tier 4 data center in these locations or this location, and that's enough, or how much detail do you really need?
Yeah, well, so really all I would need is to have the customer responsibility matrix from that FedRAMP authorization, and see if are there any do you have any responsibilities with respect to that data center? Otherwise, it's already been assessed, and unless you have some control over it and some customer responsibilities with respect to that data center, I don't need to look at it again.
Okay.
If it's gone through the FedRAMP authorization process.
Okay. Does that same inheritance process apply to the OSA as it relates to the certified MSP? In other words, if we've already been through and identified that we do all these things that are shared over here, could we just say, well, they're certified, they've already gone through this evaluation, here's the ways and places where they participate?
Yeah, except I think for the exceptions that Chris and I were talking about, where there are going to have to be demonstrations. Chris?
Yeah. If I understood the question correctly, yes. If the OSA is using a cloud service that has gone through certification or authorization, yes. And that's what is on, and this is, I think, a point that a lot of OSAs may not be familiar with. It's on the OSA to prove it. So you need that documentation from everybody you're working with who is providing either security or storage for your CUI. You need something that shows this is what they're doing. Microsoft and the big boys, they all know this, and they readily hand that over to you. For the smaller ones, you better make sure you're working with somebody that understands. It's on you.
Right. Yeah. So we got that part.
I'm sorry, Shell. Just to amplify that, and the advice I give is that because I hear a lot. Well, I'm talking to my sales rep for this cloud service provider, and they say they can't provide us any of that stuff. Then I said, well, then don't use them.
Yep.
and just tell them
See,
you're pulling that account, and they will find it. They will get it because it's part of their FedRAMP package. It's part of the
Right.
stuff that they know through going through the FedRAMP authorization process that they have to provide to the customers.
Yeah.
So it's not. So you're just talking to the wrong person. Is kind of what I tell people. You're talking to the wrong person.
Right.
They just don't know how to get it.
Right.
Yeah.
So the real question I was asking, Chris, is down a level. MSP, certified MSP, what gets inherited in the SRM, and what is the ease of that? I mean, you still have to demonstrate that those things are in place, but can you just check off the box? Yes, if the MSP is fully responsible for this particular control, they've been certified, we inherit that certification. Is that a true statement?
So I'm not going to be able to give a yes, no, but I'll explain
Okay.
why.
Okay.
What an assessor needs to be able to validate during the assessment is that each of the controls and each of the objectives has multiple pieces of evidence that support it.
Right.
And if you can accomplish that and feel comfortable as an assessor, so there's some gray area here, and you really want to understand your assessors and your C3PAOs and what their positions are on things. And one of the things that we highly, highly recommend is if you're working with a team to prepare for an assessment, that they help you find an assessment team, a Brian Hubbard C3PAO that thinks similarly, because this is new to everybody. There are a lot of them out there that aren't in some of the weekly meetings that we're in and aren't listening to these conversations. Find somebody who thinks about these things similarly, because you don't want an unpredictable result. But the answer is really, it depends on the assessor, and the assessor is going to come in there and say, this is the kind of evidence I need to support that. And if it's, yes, this person is certified and I see a very detailed shared responsibility matrix, I'm going to feel pretty good. If it's really sketchy and they're not certified, I'm probably going to need some more information.
Okay, so the question behind the question is this: should an MSP be certified?
If they want to play in this space, I really think so. Despite the rule saying no, the rule even kind of gave the caveat that it's a business decision, and it is. And if you're a small MSP, maybe your business decision is not yet. But if you really want to attract clients in the DIB, I think you want to go get certified and hold it out as an advertisement. Here we are. We understand your pain. Let us help you.
Agreed. I think it just lends that confidence factor, that trust factor, with your clients. So I think it's a good business decision. And like Chris said, I mean, if you're a very small shop and you have one customer that's in the DIB and that's all you're ever going to have, well, then just go through the assessment with them. But you still have to do all these things. You still have to do all these controls.
Yeah.
And you have to make sure your client's successful. Otherwise, your client's going to ditch you real quick.
So the rigor and so process of maintaining your certification as MSP keeps you in line, keeps you doing the things you need to do, and it's just easier from that standpoint, other than hurting the cats of this Charlie Tech does this and Joyce does that.
And may I add the further incentive that yesterday's big announcement of the CUI FAR rule gives you 100 more reasons to go do it, because now you've got everybody across the federal government that's going to have to follow these rules too. If you get certified in MSP, your Rolodex is the federal government contractors. Call them.
Right.
Here we are.
Yep. Yeah. So much to do in so little time.
Yeah. And also, I mean, the other thing is, you get in bed with a client and you're helping them through their certification process, and they're reliant on your certification to be certified. Not only does that make it really your responsibility to stay certified, but also makes you very sticky with that client. It's going to be very difficult for them.
How sticky, Brian?
I mean, I don't see how they could ever change. I mean, to be honest with you.
If they leave you, what has to happen?
They have to be recertified.
Bingo.
Yeah.
So at minimum, you got 3 years probably if you've gone through their certification.
Yeah.
And played that role.
Plus you have annual attestations.
Yeah.
That There are so many services MSPs can offer that are in this space. Let me help you with that annual attestation. Because guess what? That CEO or that executive's butt is on the line and he could go to jail.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Help these people. They don't want to be in at that kind of risk.
It's such a giant market. People don't even realize, and the benefit of certification for an MSP is huge. I would
Yes,
say it's very, very, very large.
I think
What
it's
have we, yeah. What have we overlooked? Is there any related topic that we need to talk about before we let this one go? Or
I would add, guess what? The lines are getting long and they're going to get even longer now that we know where FAR CUI is going. FAR CUI, just for everybody that's not embedded in this space, that's a federal acquisition regulation. This is how all contractors deal with the federal government. They have to go through the regulations outlined in the FAR. The DoD came up with its own, so it has DFARs, and all agencies are able to create supplements. That's the S at the end. But FAR governs everybody. This is a massive, massive opportunity now. And where I think where you can take this is unlimited. You guys can really specialize in this space, and I would.
Agreed.
Oh, and speaking of the lines, I know, and Brian, you can probably speak to this too. There are C3PAOs that don't have any space left for all of 2025. I can't assess you until 2026. Okay, guys, well, if you want to be in this space, you better start finding somebody soon.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And it's not an overnight thing. You don't just take your current system, your current things that you do and say, certify me. It doesn't work that way. Or at least you'll fail that way. It takes a lot of prep.
About half of the assessable objectives are procedural anyway. They're not tech. You cannot buy a box and all of a sudden be certified. There's practices that have to have been happening and continue to happen. I mean, that's like half of the controls is
Exactly.
procedural. So yeah, so it's not a buy the solution and walk away happy. It's a lifestyle. And that's the biggest challenge I face as a consultant is culture change for the OSA. That is my biggest challenge that I run into. I suspect for you guys too, when you're doing that, is getting them to actually do what we've said they'll do. So,
and speaking of procedures, policies are the number one way to fail an assessment. You do have to have a very detailed process in place that's in writing that everybody understands, because if Bobby doesn't know that, no, this is the way we do it, and Bobby gets interviewed, Houston, we have a problem. The assessor could say, a piece of paper doesn't tell me it's a cultural change. Exactly. I need the cultural change.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many gap assessments I've done over the last few years where, some client will be talking about other requirements. They're like, we don't want to do that. I'm like, well, okay. I mean, that's a choice. I mean, you can choose not to do that. I said, just understand you'll fail.
Yep.
You won't be able to do DoD business anymore. And say, if that's your goal, okay. Yep. But you do have to actually do these things.
Yep. Yeah. Well, guys, thanks so much. I appreciate your time and your wisdom. We talk about these things. We get together every other week and talk as consultants and those going through the process. I really respect what you do, how you do it, and what you've said today is going to be very helpful. It does clear up some clouds and helps with some definitions. Again, we'll put up a white paper that sort of hits the bullet points of what we said. I'll run it through you guys to make sure that it's appropriate and valid. And while it won't be gospel and it won't be, the final word, it'll at least be good direction for anybody going through. And I just want to say one more time to the ecology here around CMMC, none of us are competitors. We are all in this together, doing it, sharing our skills and observations. So we didn't share any secret sauce today. All we did is talk about definitions and clarify.
You stole it. You stole my final thought from me, but please let me add to it. We are not your competition. I mean, there is so much business to go around. we're enmeshed with each other. Like there are C3PAOs that are contracting other C3PAOs to come and help them out.
Yep.
We need to help each other. That's the
Yep.
mindset that I know all of us here in this call have. And I know personally Brian set up an MSP cyber group to help MSPs. Shell is an MSP and he organizes groups to get together and talk. And we consider MSPs the best partners we could have. Let's work together because there's so much to do.
That's great. Okay, well let's tie this thing off. Thank you again, guys, for showing up and
Thank
for
you.
sharing your wisdom. Any of you viewers that have questions, please comment below. This will be on YouTube and be available in our Covenant Global channel. So be sure and respond. I would like you this time to like if this was a useful session. I don't monetize my videos at all, so I don't really care about subscriptions and all that stuff. But I would like to get your comments and feedback and clarifications, which we may just go ahead and include or even have another session. But thanks again for watching, and thanks for joining us.